you can still like be in that dream job, but that doesn't mean every day, every task is going to be something that lights you up.
Jack Purdy was a Wall Street investment banker on the fast track to riches and status. But when he looked at his colleagues who were 10 years older, yes, they had big homes in the suburbs and drove fancy cars, but it wasn't for him. He wanted to be challenged. He wanted to express himself creatively. He wanted to look forward to coming to work every day. So he followed his passions into the world of crypto research. But did that make his dreams come true?
If you do try to look for work to give you all those things, you're almost asking too much out of it.
In this conversation, we'll deconstruct the concept of a dream job. We'll cover the importance of side projects, why being yourself or authenticity matters so much, how to fill your other buckets of core human needs. Let's jump in.
What were those first couple years of investment banking like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really came about just as this like preconceived notion of what does an eager, ambitious young man in today's society do, where I was always very quantitative focused, loved math classes, ended up accidentally minoring in math just by way of taking enough course and being like, oh, okay, I'm already there. And so, mentors I talk to, professors, it's like, you're studying finance and math, well, banking, right? That's what you're supposed to do. And you can earn a lot of money and work your way up, go into hedge fund, private equity. So, that there was a certain like allure to that, right? Mm-hmm. Where, you don't really as, a college kid know what work life is. And so just by kind of seeing that path, it makes sense, right? There are people that have done that before. There's some consistency that you can expect through that. So yeah, ended up getting the internship, full-time offer after, was part of a 2-year analyst program. And it was crazy like how quickly I just realized like it wasn't for me. It wasn't necessarily we're talking a couple like, month 2. I was just like,
do you remember the thing? Was there a task that you were doing when you said this isn't right for me?
I'm sure it was pulling, comps, doing some financial models, like something where it was like the gravity of like, is this really going to be like my next decade, 2 decades? Where, I looked around and, maybe this is somewhat of me projecting, but like, I couldn't shake the feeling that the majority of the people I was around, it was like, they almost felt like stuck. Whereas like, this is just, there's no alternative option. And it was like kind of jarring for me to just start like projecting my future out in, coming into an office where I knew I wasn't like lit up by the work.
That's wild because you were 2 months in. So you were, 21, 22 years old. And so people 10 years older are 30, 31, they might not even have kids at that point, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're looking, I'm 45. I left the industry when I was 35. I wasn't in banking. I was only in banking for 2 years. But it's fun. It's wild to think of like looking at a 31-year-old and being like, that's not the life that I want. When I left at 35, I looked at the 45-year-olds and I said, that's not the life that I want. And now I'm 45. So it's just no statement there other than just kind of observing it of the relativeness of time. And that it doesn't matter, whether you're 21 and 2 months old or in your 30s. And for those who aren't familiar, pulling comps is a glorified way of saying copy and pasting numbers from 10K or 10Q document into an Excel spreadsheet to come up with some multiples like P or P ratio and price to sales, things like that. Okay, so you're 2 months. Let me take you back though. In high school, did you grow up in an environment where people talked about becoming bankers or joining Wall Street? Like, was that part of your parental peer group or your cultural peer group?
In a sense, I'd say, it wasn't like hyper focused on finance necessarily. I mean, my dad's a financial advisor. So always kind of had it as, hey, that's a good path to go down. And, I'm 50% my dad. So, right, a lot of those skill sets probably transfer. But yeah, I'd say I had a very sort of average, just middle-class American, right, growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. Wouldn't say there was a ton of like direction given from a career path. It's mostly like, hey, study, get good grades, go to school, and that's when you figure it out.
Yeah, got it. And so you're in month 2 of this 2-year program. What are the hours like?
Long, working nights and weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think a lot of what led to this inner turmoil was also like the juxtaposition of starting to find something that did light me up. And, I was starting to just become like more interested in the Web3 crypto world.
Yeah. What
being
year
in
was
New
this
York.
around?
So this would have been 2017.
2017. Okay. Got it. Yeah. So 7
So yeah,
years
started
ago.
that fall, right? Like I think the mainstream media was like starting to pick up on crypto, be like, oh, right, prices are rising, people are talking about it. Even
Where
people
was
in the
Bitcoin at
office.
2017? I can look it up, but roughly.
So when I joined, it would have been probably sub 10K, and then had like a
10K.
run up to 20K.
Got it.
At the peak there.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, early crypto days. And when you're there with these Wall Street peers, are you sharing with them that you have this like passion, this side interest? Are you talking about it to whoever wants to listen? Or are you kind of keeping it, closed off because you don't want to kind of cross that barrier?
Yeah, so I'm smirking because at first, like, I was almost becoming known as like the crypto guy, because I would always be talking about it, curious to hear people's thoughts, if there was any future overlap in kind of traditional finance, kind of credit markets, and a lot of what's being created in like the crypto DeFi world. And some people were interested. I think most people kind of poo-pooed it at the time, but I started. This was actually the beginning of my writing journey. Was just writing research with my general thoughts on crypto, right? Framing like, Bitcoin as kind of a decentralized gold, macro inflation resistant hedge. And so I started, publishing these first on Medium, and then, I'd share on Twitter and LinkedIn. And at one point my boss called me in and like, was like, Jack, you work at a bank. This is a financial institution. You can't be posting this stuff. Like, it could be construed as investment advice, and pretty much say like, full stop, you can't do that. Wow. So I just stopped posting on LinkedIn, knowing he's not going to see it on Twitter.
Wow. I think people don't realize this about Wall Street, is that, and I wonder what you experienced it, but from your own perspective of seeing others, is side projects are really frowned upon. And I mean, you were in a side project where there was potentially like at an abstract level, a conflict of interest in terms of, money and investing and so on. But I remember when I wasn't even in banking at that point, but I would organize like big networking dinners with people from fashion and people from startup world, just like kind of these Jeffersonian dinners. And I hid that from all my peers because, in my opinion, what I thought and what I think is true is like, in finance, the minute someone thinks that you're not all in on the task at hand, all these red flags go up for them, and then you kind of become a pariah, and then it kills your career. Like, it kills your career trajectory. And so besides the compliance part of what you were doing, how did that side project kind of land, at an intellectual level for them?
Yeah. So, and I think this actually kind of brings up a good point around how these like large institutions, and I think this is more prevalent in finance, but almost viewing people as productive assets, right? Where it's like, you have certain costs of, we're paying you X amount, so we expect X in return. And therefore, if you're doing anything outside providing direct value to the firm, like, that comes at a cost. So like any side project is thought of as, oh, this is like time where you could be being productive. So we almost want to like stymie that just to make you the most productive, ROI generating asset.
Yeah. Wow. And so did you continued to pursue, so you were lit up by this side project, this research, this crypto, this new market. And, I mean, we're still in the go-go days, but it was probably the go-go of the go-go of the go-go days back then. When did you decide to leave, and how did you go about leaving Wall Street?
So it was probably, 6 to 9 months in, where I was like making the firm commitment of like, I need to get out and like start actively interviewing places. But like at the time, right, there weren't many entry-level jobs in this like super nascent industry, especially for someone non-technical. So I mean, I was, nights and weekends on top of the nights and weekends to just devour as much, crypto research, starting to post more articles. And it took me a good year and a half before ended up landing the job at Messari.
Wow.
After I was doing I was doing some part-time work with them just for free, being like, hey,
Wow.
listen, like I have these ideas, you're a research firm, like let me contribute, I don't care if you don't pay me, I'll provide value and hopefully it works out down the line. And
Yeah.
eventually it did.
I love that you shared that, Jack, and kudos to you, because a lot of people talk about what you just did. You're like, oh, find a side project, put your work out there, try stuff for free, like the free internship is kind of, the calling card to a full-time offer and so on. But it's so rare to actually see people who do it, right? Like it's a nice meme. It's like a nice narrative, but people that actually do it are really in very limited supply. So I just want to commend you for saying you're going to do it. Just so our audience, because a lot of our audience is thinking of making a switch like that. Can you give some perspective as to like roughly like how many hours were you working on your quote unquote day job and how many hours were you working on your side project?
So yeah, I'd say, especially right when I joined in banking, where I was like, I'll give it a try, right? That was, close to 80-ish hours a week. Slowly, as I was just less bought in and didn't care as much.
Quiet quitter.
Getting down, yeah, it's like more on like the 60, 50, 60 hours. And then, trying to do an hour or two a day of crypto research, starting to write things.
Awesome. So you get this offer from the firm's Messari, you said?
Correct.
Messari. And had you finished your 2-year banking program, or did you leave early or after?
So left a month before the end of the 2-year analyst program.
Oh, wow. So did you forego your second year bonus?
So yes, and technically had to repay back a lot of like the travel stipends and stuff they gave me along the way.
Oh, wow.
They never chased me down for it, but.
Wow. Got it. And it was one of those things where you couldn't wait, like the opportunity didn't enable you. Because I guess you would get 2 years, but then you have to wait 2 or 3 months for the bonus to hit your bank account. So it's not really, it was probably a couple months until you were actually getting that extra money.
Yeah. And to me at that point, I was like, what's a little bit of extra money versus the opportunity to like seize this opportunity and just go all in on something that I feel so strongly about. And so, to me, the money question was almost like not even a big factor. My parents thought I was crazy in and of itself. It's like, oh, you're leaving the steady job, going to take a 50% pay cut for, a 10-person startup in a, risky industry. And to me, I'm like running that calculation. It's like, of course, this is a no-brainer.
Totally. Well, did you walk us through why you didn't think that was risky? Because you were stepping off of a known track. You're taking a massive pay cut. You're going into an unknown industry. And one of the things about the Wall Street path, which we could discuss how true this is, but there is a belief that it's one of the paths where if you step off, it's hard to step back on, right? So you're kind of burning one of those paths. Why, like, how would you explain to someone why it wasn't risky?
Yeah. And, I'll say like, maybe this isn't very logical, but like the way I was thinking about it was if I'm able to commit my faculties towards something I care about, like I'll still be working long hours, but like it's because I want to. And over a long enough time, like that will compound to where I will be rewarded for the value I provide.
Totally.
Right. So, if I join as an early analyst and I'm able to, really cut my teeth and grind, but it's because I genuinely want to.
Yeah.
My aggregate output will be, an order of magnitude greater when I look back on 10 years of that type of work.
Totally.
And, being, now 6 years in, I'd say that's definitely been the case. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a pithy saying that I would share with people, which is you don't want to compete with someone who's having fun. So if you can kind of like find that alignment piece, because it was similar for me in much bigger kind of sunk costs and much bigger opportunity costs, because I left at 35. So I was deeply in the path, but still 35, if you're going to work till you're 60, you're basically in the middle of your career. No, you're under the middle of your career. But people would always say, and I had a daughter, and people would always say like, that's so risky that, you're walking away from a lot of money in the track and all that. And I would say two things. One is I believe that it was riskier for my daughter to just see her dad doing something just for money. That felt riskier. But also similarly to you, the equation is jarringly similar. I probably spent an hour a day on my side projects. And I was so, they weren't as centralized as yours. You had one thing, it sounds like. I had like a bunch of little things I was trying. But I said to myself, if I could get all of this done with, 7 hours a week, imagine what I could get done with, 70. And that was a bet that I was willing to make on myself, which didn't feel risky at all.
Yeah, and then thinking about the compounding effects of that now over your next decade.
Totally. No, it's beautiful. So kudos to you for seeing that so early. I guess it's hard to see, in any phase of a career. Okay, so you get a step closer to your dream job. Investment banking is not your dream job. We've established that. You're out. You're 2 years out of your career, and then you land in this. It is the thing that you were doing for free, and now you're getting paid for it. Presumably, you have other financial upsides for being part of it. What did you learn about yourself and your relationship to work in this second chapter?
Yeah, so there definitely was a big just honeymoon phase of, okay, I can now walk into my office in flip-flops, right? I'm at the WeWork. There's the beer taps in the lobby. It's like, working around people that love what they do and just like that type of energy. And so, yeah, for the first, handful of months, into a year, it's like I'm getting into sort of the steady state and flow of what it is to work at a startup. And, even sort of during this time, I'm still thinking about, how can I best like optimize my life? Is this what I'm meant to be doing? And so I was a research analyst from the get-go, and I think it was the best opportunity because like I'm just paid to learn, right? So as like a new entrant into an industry, being able to just sit down every day, get to explore my curiosities, like that was doing a lot for me. But as time kind of progressed, realizing that, okay, I like to think I'm pretty smart, I'm a decent writer, but is research like the end all be all for me? And also seeing how I loved interacting with people, talking to kind of different industry participants, jamming on ideas for growing the business. And so, yeah, about 2 years in, ended up making the switch into business development, kind of very organically, just by way of talking to enough potential clients and like bringing in business that they gave me a shot.
Within the same firm?
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. How much of it in hindsight was, you had mentioned the allure or the newness of it, right? So you have time freedom, you have fashion freedom, right? You can like, you don't have to wear the mask. You probably may still have to wear a mask, but not the Wall Street mask that is, very like, I play fantasy football and I like to drink Bud Light on weekends and White Claws. But how much of that was the kind of the rose losing its bloom versus an organic evolution of your interests?
Yeah, so I'd say I really did feel like I could authentically express myself. And that was like such a big thing where that idea of wearing a mask just did not sit right, where it was like I had to be someone else walking into the office first. When I walk out, I was like, I want to be me at all times.
Yeah. And you can do that at Messari.
Yeah. So very much kind of from day one, felt I was able to take that mask off, throw it in the garbage, never look back.
And had the attractiveness of the role changed? Like, was it a case of like, the grass is always greener? Because I guess, I have this, they might call it the arrival fallacy. I have a pithy name for like the when then. I call it the when then trap, which is, when I can, wear whatever I want to work, then I'll be happy. Or when I get to research crypto all day and get paid to it, then I'll be happy. When you think of your kind of internal relationship to the work that you were doing, like was there any of that arrival fallacy at play, or was it just like, nope, like I'm just going to continue to, keep drinking from this fire hose, expand my remit and grow as a professional?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as once I like settled into the role, and then now, I'm a year, 2 years in, like I started getting that creeping feeling that this isn't what I'm meant to be doing. It was like an amazing opportunity. But in terms of like the day to day, the sexiness kind of wore off. And I found myself like longing for, okay, what's next? And that's kind of what got me thinking of, okay, I'm a pretty sociable person. I studied business. So like maybe there's a route for me to, start doing more kind of business development, sales stuff.
Got it. And so and as your career is evolving, so you moved into business development, and how did the career play out like after that?
So better than I could have ever kind of expected. They, took a shot on me because like I had zero sales BD experience. And I vividly remember the second I saw that posting where it's like, our head of BD was making the first hire. And I was like, I want that. And, at the time they were thinking, okay, well, we want someone with experience in this role, right? We're still a small startup. We can't afford to like train someone up. So they ended up giving me like a month-long like trial period of, hey, we just launched this new enterprise product, go out and, see if you can go sell it. And if you can, we can move you in. If not, you're still happy at research. You can still continue doing your thing. And I think halfway through that trial period, ended up closing a couple big deals, and they were like, all right, Jack, this is what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah. Got it. And so if I'm hearing you describe your career experiences, right, we're talking about like the dream job, and does a dream job exist? So, obviously something that you index, I'm replaying back some of the things that you've said over the conversation. So one is the ability to authentically show up at work, right? That is for you, it sounds like a requisite of a dream job. Another requisite seems to be like a deep intellectual curiosity on the underlying subject matter, which for you was crypto. So that would be another. Another would be, and maybe you could fill out the matrix for us, right? If you think of that transition from being a researcher to business development, it could be like a continuation of challenge, or maybe, research in my mind seems to be a much more kind of cocoon, like internal facing work, inward looking work. Business development tends to be social. And so maybe there's like an element of like, what level of social interaction does work bring me, or what level of challenge does work bring me? As you're kind of going through it, have you thought throughout your career, have you thought about, like, if we're talking about these like perfect dream jobs, have you thought about, you strike me as someone very rigorous, intellectually rigorous, that like, oh, like your dream job would have like an awesome boss, like no mess, and all these attributes.
Yeah. And so it really is something I've spent, an inordinate amount of time thinking about. And, even once I, settled into the BD role and ended up like launching a service that, now has really taken the company off, and, I'm kind of heading up this whole team. It was like, on paper I had it all, but I was still grappling with, I'm still showing up to a laptop every day. I'm looking out, and, I'd much rather be, journaling on a mountain, doing yoga, meditating, like all these things. Cause it's like this day to day still feels like there's something missing. And, I think there was almost a bit of like navel gazing, or just like trying to like over index what that dream job actually looks like, and creating unrealistic expectations. And I think this is a lot of sort of what I've written about now, on just the inherent nature of work, where like you can still like be in that dream job, but that doesn't mean, every day, every task is going to be something that lights you up. And like, that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. And when you think of that kind of navel gazing, that period, is it because dream jobs have shitty elements to them? Like, like I would joke, like even the president of the United States has to reply to emails, right? So like, like everyone has to reply to emails, and all things considered, we would never want to reply to email, like if we didn't have to. So is that like kind of part and parcel, is like, you have to have maybe like some duality of work, like there's good things and there's bad things, and maybe you want to have more of the good things than the bad things? Or another possibility that I would put forth, that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is that like we are asking work to do a job that it's not meant to do, right? Like make us feel whole or make us feel loved or what have you. It could be a lot of different things. How do you think about the limits of like what work can deliver to you, both in like the tangible and the bigger examine life questions?
And so this is where I think it's important, sort of where you shine your spotlight, right? Where what kind of brought me a lot of solace here was thinking like, okay, I'm still at a company where I'm surrounded by brilliant people who are making me better, who are very pleasant to work around. There's still this like larger mission where I care deeply about this industry, moving it forward, professionalizing it. So knowing that my efforts are working towards that goal and focusing on that versus just the minute tasks of, okay, I'm here sitting in front of my laptop and here's my to-do list, and I need to, update our CRM, put together these onboarding docs for a new hire, like, things that might not be like, when I wake up like, oh, hell yeah, I get to do.
Yeah.
But when you sort of reframe it as, okay, these are all efforts in service of something I do care deeply about, like that really made the day-to-day just sit a lot better, not think like, oh, I need to go find a better job because I'm not happy.
Got it. And so is that a permission structure of like, or is it an acceptance that every job is going to have just stupid shit you have to do?
I think so. And it's funny because what sort of gave me this realization was this book on Taoism, the Zhuangzi, right? Where it's a 2,500-year-old philosopher, and he's talking about this exact same things, where it's like, as a human on this planet, right, there are certain obligations, right? And at the time he's talking about things passed down by your father or your boss, where like you have to do it, but like that doesn't mean you can't like fully immerse yourself in like the banality of it, because just understanding like the truth that like this work is here and it is your duty to do it, and not trying to make it fill something that it's not meant to, right? It's work.
Yeah. Fascinating. And so, but like, how does one know the limits of that, right? Because you could also use that line of thinking and end up in this slippery slope where it's like, okay, we're both quantitative people. So it's like 10% of our job is, shitty, rote, mundane work, right? And that's just the work. I'm hearing echoes of like Dharma. It's like just like the thing that we're supposed to do, like in our lives. But if it's 20%, or if it's, let's use an extreme example of like, if it's 90%, is that like, is it still okay to use this kind of crutch of sorts, my words, not yours, that like, yeah, this is just part and parcel of what we're meant to do. Like, where does that, is it right to even think of it? I'm knowing that it's Taoist, there's no like cutoffs, right? Like, but how would you think of like that threshold?
So
point?
Yeah, I wish I had a more clear answer, because I think it does depend. But I think, if you're someone earlier in your career, that percentage can probably be skewed a bit towards mundane, because it's like, you're new to the workforce, right?
Yep.
You're yet to really find your best value contributing work. I think it's also easier to justify a little bit higher of a percent of the mundane work if you feel that like high level alignment, right? Where this is where I think it's important not to use this frame of thinking if, you know, your investment banking, it's like, oh, this sucks, but, you know, I need to be productive because like that's just work. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
but, you know, do you actually care about providing this $1 billion line of credit to this large corporation you don't care anything about?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where you can kind of get stuck in this like existential crisis of like, what does it all even mean? Right. Where
Yeah.
when I go to sleep, I'm like, okay, this work I know was able to bring, you know, this company one step forward, help this industry one step forward in a way where it's like, that feels good to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're spot on. Is like if I'm hearing you correctly, it's you have an alignment with the mission of your company, right? And so if your company was an investment bank, you're like, well, I don't really care about another credit line. Or if your company was an oil company, you're like, I don't care if we drill another, you know, hole in the Gulf of Mexico. And so the mission, and so I'd love to dig into that, because I think, are you of the belief that like it's hard to be satisfied with your work if you don't believe in the overarching mission of the company that employs you?
I tend to think so. And you know, everyone is different, but like for myself, that's almost a like prerequisite for fulfilling work, that like I need to feel like there is some like grander vision that I'm working towards.
Got it.
Like otherwise I kind of sink into this, like, what does it all mean? Like, you know, I'm just going to do this and then, you know, retire and, you know.
That's fascinating, because crypto is an interesting one, because you can, well, I'm hearing you in almost like two layers of this, where there's like the very top layer, which is, my words, not yours, you know, the democratization of finance, right? Like, you know, crypto can really solve a lot of strange financial log jams and incentives and so on that exist, right? And it's, I'm saying it, I'm putting words in your mouth, but like, it's like good for humanity, so to speak, versus, you know, we could come back to this, but like, I feel like it's also possible for folks to, like, someone once made the same argument about Twitter. They're like, well, Twitter is like more transparency among humans is like an absolute net positive for humanity. And so I feel excited about working for Twitter. And we don't have to debate the merits of Twitter, but like, there's a large chunk of people that would fundamentally disagree with that statement. And there's a percentage that would agree. So in one regards, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. That would be one thing. And I'll ask for your thoughts after the second thing. But the other thing is that, I mean, you almost maybe have, and the reason why I'm breaking it down so scientifically is because I know a lot of people who are listening are trying to emulate paths or trajectories that you and I have taken. And so the more we can kind of like break open our thinking, the more helpful it would be. But the other that you said is like, you're watching yourself build towards something, right? So then you could be at an oil company. You could be, you know, like the thing you might be building for is like this new area of the Gulf of Mexico that's never been drilled before. And so that in and of itself can be fulfilling, of like moving something forward that's never been done before, whether it's in like a really sexy industry, cool industry, like where you believe in the mission, or on a micro level. How do you think of that kind of like, yes, like sounds like you wouldn't be excited to do exactly the same role you do, you know, at Exxon. But would you be able to find the satisfaction of like taking something that's new or untested and building it out, even if you didn't care about the mission of the bigger parent?
Yeah, because I think you can almost extend the idea of a mission beyond like that company providing like a better future, right? So it's like from Messari's perspective, that's sort of where I'm at, where I'm like, okay, we need better data analytics to professionalize this industry, help move it forward. But there's a myriad of different like stories you construct, and this is where I think it's like highly individualistic for how you think about like this higher mission, where you could be working, let's stick with like this Exxon example, right? Where, you know, maybe you believe that like your team is like a force for good within this company, where like you can enact change to actually help further causes you believe in, right? Make them more environmentally sustainable, or even on like a personal level where, hey, maybe this role is like a stepping stone, or like, let me just, I'm learning all about the oil and energy industry because one day I want to be a founder to disrupt this industry, right? And it's like, that can be sort of like the stepping stone. So there's a number of different ways you can craft it. And this is where I think, it's a worthwhile exercise to like get really crystal clear on your values such that you can then align work with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That question I asked, a couple questions earlier, like, what are your thoughts on the expectations that we, as a society or as a subculture? You could, even put folks like you and I as a subculture of workers and entrepreneurs, employees. What are your thoughts on the expectations we put on work in terms of it, like delivering us a sense of like satisfaction and happiness?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Because again, it gets back to like the fundamental nature of work, and that it's not something that's supposed to fill up all the different like buckets of being human. So you should be careful to look for work to fill like those interpersonal relationships, to fill your need for creativity, because a lot of times it won't, right? And that's where it's important to have side projects, to have things outside your work life, because there are inevitably gaps there. And if you do try to look for work to give you all those things, you're almost asking too much out of it.
Yeah. So what are you mentioned creativity, interpersonal relationships. We talked about kind of mission and sense of, like higher purpose. Are there other categories that we're asking work too much for?
Maybe like intellectual stimulation at times. Like work can provide that, but for people who are just naturally curious and sort of have this insatiable desire to learn, oftentimes, work might be like a very narrow focus. And so, it's worthwhile to make sure you're kind of filling that bucket with educational resources or learning, outside just your day-to-day job.
Yeah. What about like questions of self-worth?
And I think that's a good one, because so many people, I think particularly where we come from, tie so much of their identity to work. And that's a dangerous trap.
Yeah. What's been your experience with like your own identity? Because you've always been in kind of high stakes industries, for lack of a better term, but obviously industries that are fueled by money and transactions and valuations and things like that. Do you find that your sense of self-worth is intertwined with your job?
Yeah. And whether or not, that's something, if in my perfect world, I would be tethered, like it's there's a almost like innate part of us that does that. And I think you just got to be careful or at least be aware of that. Whereas something I noticed when I was in banking, right? It's like an early grad. It's like, oh, what do you do? I'm in banking. Like that felt good to me. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in banking. I worked hard for this. And feel something similar now, where it's like, oh, what do you do? It's like, oh, I head up sales for this big Web3 research firm. Like, but recognizing that there's still so much more to me than I can describe with a job title.
Yeah.
And so trying to almost just like sit with that and like recognize, okay, when it's just, Jack's alone in front of a mirror, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at myself and all like the different components of me, trying to develop like a healthy relationship with all the other things, right? Where, oh, I'm also, a friend, I'm a writer, I'm like all these other things that kind of play a part in like piecing together the picture of my identity and making sure, I'm not just having it be tethered to a job title, because knowing that won't be there forever.
Absolutely. And as you've written on your blog and newsletter, a life examined, what have you found to be the juiciest kind of examination, areas of examination, areas of inquiry for either you or your readers?
So one huge kind of unlock for me was sort of the nature of like creativity, where growing up, both my parents, were never like artistic or, creative in the traditional sense. And so sort of put that on us as kids, where it's like, we're Purdy's, we get good grades, we're good at sports. But like, we just don't have a creative bone in our body.
Yeah.
And I remember like really taking that to heart as a kid and just being like, well, that's just not me. And it wasn't, until I started writing more, and especially once I started writing outside just like research and on more of these life examining topics, that I really called that into question. Where it's like, okay, I'm coming up with these ideas, I am creating them. Oh, does that mean I'm creative? And like realizing it's like creativity, that's all it is. It's creating something that wasn't there before. And so thinking about it like as a practice or an exercise, in the same way I wake up and I work out to make my muscles bigger, I can just get in this habit of creating for the sake of creating and like working this muscle, because every human being on earth has that capacity.
Yeah. Is that you express that predominantly through writing for you? Yeah. It's fascinating to hear you say that, because similarly, as a child of immigrants, creativity, that feels like way too high on Maslow's hierarchy. It's like, we just want to fucking eat and put a roof over our heads. And so creativity, that message was, I don't even think it was part of the conversation, so to speak. And it's fascinating because I think that, let me ask you this. If you think of like a creative avatar, like you point to someone and you're like, this person is a creative, like who do you point to?
Yeah, when I think of like the exemplary creative, right? It's, someone that's like super in touch with like their inner world and able to express it through poetry and painting and song, like all of these like traditionally creative outlets, which for sure that is creativity, but that's not like the only route to it.
Give us a name of someone, like a famous or someone in your life where like that person's a creative. For me, it's like Pharrell Williams from the Neptunes, the rapper. He's like a producer, he's a fashion icon, he can sing, he's in movies now, he's the creative director of Louis Vuitton. I'm like, when I think of like, or like Kanye, before he like went crazy, but like, these like kind of polymath-ish, forces of nature, very visible in these kind of very traditional domains of creativity, like music, fashion, the arts.
One that just popped in my head, probably because I just heard him on a podcast, an old one, but like someone like Hugh Jackman, that has like such a rich experience in like actual traditional theater, right? Outside just like movies too. And there's just such a sense of like authenticity I get from him, from being able to like channel his creative efforts sort of into these fields.
Totally. And so I guess the point I was going there is that I know that I did myself a disservice by holding, up Pharrell Williams or Hugh Jackman's as kind of the model, the exemplars of like a creative person. Cause like I'm a fucking like quantitative, nerdy, left brain guy. And like, I'm not like wearing an oversized, cowboy hat to Paris Fashion Week, or making, like bleeding edge, electro tracks with Daft Punk, right? It's like, and I think that for me, I had to, but at the same time, I've been off of the Wall Street track for a decade now, and my life's been highly good. Like I'll spin up a podcast, out of thin air, and 70 episodes later, here we are, right? I know how to, I've been writing for 10 years now. I know how to like edit videos. I know copywriting, like there's all these, it's almost like creative. If Pharrell Williams is, again, in my world, creative with a capital C, I think I'm creative with like a lowercase C, but I'm damn creative. I'm damn lower C creative. And maybe that all rolls up into uppercase C creative, or maybe that's just a fucking myth that like upper C creative is a thing or is better than another version of creativity.
Mhm.
Where do you see
Yeah.
yourself on that creative spectrum?
Yeah. So I'd say, it's something that's been like a recent finding of mine of seeing these, creative faculties. But what's interesting is like once I started writing and now like telling stories, fleshing out these ideas in a more traditionally creative sense, like that has opened doors in like my work where, okay, if I'm putting together like a big strategy presentation, like those creative muscles kind of flow in through there of like coming up with like new ideas, being able to now express them in like a more storytelling like fashion where normally I would never say, putting together strategy deck is creative, but now with this like expanded definition, it can actually manifest itself, I think, in a lot of different ways that, aren't maybe, as you said, like capital C creative.
Do you think that it is a human need to be able to express yourself creatively?
I think so. And I think the more I think about it, like the more just like reverberating effects to the exercise of creativity that like enables you to be more you.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Yeah, amazing. Well, Jack, last question. I have the honor of going to a lot of kind of undergraduate classes to give guest lectures and so on. And so I get a lot of 18-year-olds, 19-year-old, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed that ask for career advice. And so if one of those students were to ask you, "Hey Jack, how do I go about finding my dream job?" What advice would you give them?
I would say spend some time and try to get clear on like your North Star of like, what do you want to be working towards? And I think then like the actual job and the company itself almost come afterwards where it's like, I want to be, furthering this cause that I care about, or, I want to be pushing, forward this kind of technological space, like whatever that is, that it's like, you feel it, not in your head, in your heart, and then working like backwards to come up with, okay, nuts and bolts, how can I have my faculties in service of that North Star?
I love it. Beautiful. Kind of start with the end in mind, right? Or start with why.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thanks so much for taking the time today. Been a true pleasure to speak with you, get to learn from you, get to know you. Tell our listeners, and we'll put it in the show notes as well, where they can go find out more about you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Substack is where I publish most frequently. So A Life Examined. You can also find me on Twitter at jpurd17. I often share thoughts, mostly on crypto there, but can get a bit of both with Substack too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jack.
Absolutely. Appreciate having me on. This was great.